Welcome back to Spitballin Cards. In today's video, we're talking all about Shohei Ohtani and pitchers. So it's a fun episode because we're discussing the gambling accusations. And on top of that, if there is hobby relevance for pitchers anymore, or if it's just game over for their investability and maybe even collectability in some ways. So let's introduce who's here. My name is Scott. We also have Phil, Jeff, and Ty. Chris is off this week, but he'll be back next week. So let's jump into this. I will summarize really quickly what's happened with Ohtani. First game of the MLB season. After that game, Ippe, who is his translator, he actually came out and said, "Hey guys, I made a mistake. I was gambling." There's a big story coming out about it. Turns out the accusation is that Ippe actually bet and lost $4.5 million, and Ohtani paid off the debt. That was what Ippe said, but Ohtani saying, "I didn't do such thing, and it was stolen from me." There's people who are conspiracy theorists, or even like it might even be a relative real possibility that Ohtani was just placing the bets through Ippe himself, and that is a big issue. The reports, this is with the federal government, not just Major League Baseball. This is a Fed thing, which is a lot different than just internal investigation, so can't really be swept under the rug. But overall, people are thinking it's like actually a cover-up and he's the fall guy. So let's just turn that over to you all. Do you think that is the case? What impact do you also think that has on his cards? Phil, what do you think?
So when I first heard this, I was, it almost seemed like surreal. The fact that one account gets completely reversed the following day or a couple days later, and oh no, he actually stole the money from me. It wasn't me trying to send it on, his behalf because he had all these gambling debts. So I look at what I already know of Ohtani, or think I know of Ohtani, based on my observations of him on the field and his character. And my first thought was like, there's probably a 75% chance he didn't actually bet himself. And I'm not talking about baseball yet. I'm just saying bet in general. And I know there's been some rumors coming out that it's not thought that there were any bets that were placed on baseball, which is great because if you look at, what is it? Rule 21 or whatever, or 20
Yeah.
misconduct. The penalty is getting more and more harsh as soon as it involves baseball. And
they can bet on any
against
other sport, right? They can bet any other sport outside of baseball in states where it's legal. So
exactly. So Otani doesn't strike me as a guy that would gamble, especially if it's culturally banned where he's from. Although you could make a similar case to the interpreter there. But after seeing the speech today in front of press, where they allowed no questions, and of course he's got a new translator with him, I would say my thoughts about him gambling probably go from like 75% sure that he didn't to personally about 95% sure that he didn't. So then for me, again, this is my opinion, it's then how much of his story is actually honest. Is he being 90% truthful, 95%, 50%? I think he's being at least 90% truthful. I think where this might fall apart for him could be, did he actually send the wire to cover the gambling credits, those gambling debts himself? Or was it really Mizuhara doing that behind his back from his account? That's where I'm not sure. I'm also not sure if Ohtani didn't really know this whole time that his best friend didn't have a gambling problem.
Yeah.
You would have thought if he was with him all the time that he would have noticed. But then again, people can bet high stakes, and it doesn't take theoretically that many bets to rack up $4.5 million if you're really bad at it. So again, if there's any dishonesty, to me, it wouldn't have to do with gambling himself. It would have to do with whether he knew Mizuhara was, and the whole like wire to an illegal bookie thing. Like, did he do it and not know, or did he do it and know it was illegal and thought he could get away with it? I think a lot of people on Twitter and X, whatever, on the internet are really going hard after Ohtani. But what they need to remember is, what kind of person is Pete Rose, right? And I never watched him play, so I'm sure people had a much, higher opinion of him when he was playing. But I see him now. I see him canceling at local shows because, I don't know, he's hungover the night before. He does it multiple times. He's got a lot of other stuff in his past that's horrible. And when I think of degenerate, I think of somebody like Pete Rose. And if I had to pick between Mizuhara or Ohtani, like seeing how hard it is to be a two-way player, I would think that Mizuhara was the degenerate, not Ohtani. Some people are making the argument that Otani's thrown this guy under the bus and he's a terrible person for it. Well, this isn't the same as, Barry Bonds and Greg Anderson. This isn't the same as Ryan Braun and the tester. This is, in my opinion, good person Otani versus degenerate. So if he does go to jail, is that a harsher crime than he deserves? Maybe. But $4.5 million worth of debt getting paid for by your friend, a lot of people wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. Like, would Otani really do that if he knew about that? Would he really cover that? I know he makes a lot of money, but would he really cover that? Yeah. Because you have to believe that he would if you think that he's, lying about, oh, he stole money from me and I didn't actually wire it myself.
So one thing in regards to stealing that I've thought about and also heard other accounts discuss is, could it be technically stealing if Ohtani didn't understand what he was paying off, didn't realize that it was a legal activity? Did he think that he was just paying off other debts and didn't realize that it was going towards like illegal gambling rings? And if that's the case, that could be viewed as stealing because he was lying about where this money was going. So that could also be true. He could have sent it and it still could be stealing. And the one thing I'll know, and again, the reason why I'm not really worried about it personally is because of the fact that this is a federal investigation. This is not a Major League Baseball investigation that could be swept under the rug. If Ohtani's denying this hard for a federal investigation, there is major consequences for baseball for lying, such as coming clean and say, yeah, I was betting, right? But also for prison time, for one, all these different things he's done. So I do not think it's that way. But Jeff, Ty, do you disagree? Do you have any more concerns than Phil and I do?
Well, I'll hop in. You guys touched on a lot of points that I wanted to. I feel personally much better about the situation for Ohtani and for baseball, both as a fan of the game and a collector of his, after seeing the press conference today. When I first heard that there weren't going to be any questions and answers, and originally they said there'd be no cameras, I thought it was just going to be a rehearsed statement. And while it was written out, it definitely seemed to come from Ohtani. And he seemed very angry and upset. And there seemed like an element of betrayal from his friends. So, yeah, we don't know exactly what's going on, but how hard he went against it today, publicly saying that he did not bet on baseball, which is why until anything comes out about baseball, I don't like even seeing him and Pete Rose in the same sentence or meme, as they keep conflating these two situations when they're completely different until I see baseball involved. But to deny that he ever did any betting, or I believe the words was knowingly paid off illegal gambling or something. There was some specificity with his words there, to Scott's point about maybe he agreed to pay something and didn't really know what it was. But he went so hard at it today that there could be really potential large civil, for sure, and possibly criminal violations based on what he said today. So I just feel like unless he's really sure about what he's saying, it's going to be, they're going to be able to find out the truth. Once the feds are involved, they're going to be able to find out. And this conspiracy theory about baseball being able to pay off the federal government or the state government, I'm not buying any of that. So I feel much better about it today. At the same time, Phil did mention the Ryan Braun situation. And as a Brewer fan, I also believe Ryan Braun when he vehemently denied taking steroids. So as a fan, I felt the betrayal of that. But I also feel like that's made me more skeptical of these situations. And still, I feel like Ohtani's on the good side of this situation.
One thing I want to note real quick too, his relationship with Ippe was a little bit different than a traditional player translator, right? They were like best friends. They did everything. From what I heard, Ippe was actually like his assistant more than an interpreter. Like Ohtani can speak English. And of course, dealing with the media, you prefer to have an interpreter so your words don't get taken out of context. But like apparently it's not that abnormal or unthought of to have him be involved with finances, with banking. Ohtani has way more important things to worry about than that. And so he has his hands in a lot more stuff than it sounds for just a pure interpreter, which I think is important to call out. Ty, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot here. First thing, like for me, I'm pretty passionate about trying to give people the benefit of the doubt. Like that's what's kind of frustrating. We live in a country where you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. And that's not the way the media works. It's not the way social media works. It's not the way most people work. Thankfully, typically it's the way the justice system works. This guy, Phil, I think you mentioned or kind of at least alluded to like a cultural element to this, right? Like Japanese culture is very high on respect, integrity. We see when these athletes come for World Baseball Classic, fans, I should say, they like clean up the stands after themselves. There's a lot to that. Ippe, while being Japanese, actually grew up in LA. His family moved here when he was 7. And we've seen seemingly one thing after another now come out about things he's lied about. He never actually went to this, where I don't know, was it Berkeley or somewhere in Southern California? He wasn't actually the interpreter for it was one of the Red Sox pitchers. You'll know, Phil.
We had a bunch of Tomooka,
Okajima. I think it was Hideki Okajima. And so they're like, no, that's not true. That's not true. People are starting to dig more into obviously his past. And it seems like the guy just might be a liar or might not be who he says he is. There have been countless examples of young athletes in other sports and in baseball probably who get taken advantage of by family members who they trust, by agents, by other people. They have money stolen and embezzled. And in this situation, that's really what it seems like more to me. It seems like there's something shady going on between the two. And into knowing that Otani, who to me seems like he seems like a very simple guy. I watched a lot of and looked at a lot of information into him before I started to put any money into him last year, kind of talking myself into it based on his character. And when he was playing in Japan in his teenage years, they just talk about how the only thing he cared about was baseball, getting better at pitching and hitting. He wasn't spending money. He doesn't seem to care about that. He just, gets married and does it like under the radar, wants that to be private. So to come over here to the US at age 23, speaking some English with a ton of pressure on you and wanting to just focus on baseball and being really great at baseball, it doesn't actually seem improbable to me that you have this guy who kind of comes in, gets close to you, and then is able to take advantage of you. And maybe he did try to pay off, some kind of a debt for him as a friend. And like you said, Scott, maybe it was not obviously what he said it was. And then at that point, I would say it's theft. So I overall just feel really sick about the whole thing. I've actually been intentionally avoiding reading any news about it or digging into it too much because I think this would be a massive blow for baseball in general, for the sports world in general, and obviously for baseball cards. So I almost don't even want to think about it. I know I have a little bit of cognitive dissonance going on about it. I just want to hope that it's not what it seems like it could be and give him the benefit of the doubt.
Do you watch Baseball Doesn't Exist, the YouTube channel?
Yeah.
Amazing channel. Amazing.
Yeah, awesome.
He's done a couple different videos on Japanese baseball players and Otani in particular.
Yeah.
When Otani was first playing for the team, who did he play for? Do you guys know? Was it the
Giants?
I think it's the Giants. So I don't know. Whoever he was playing for, he was making like $2 million a year.
Yeah.
And he would send every single dollar to his parents and would live off of $300 a month because he stayed in the team dorms.
Right.
Yeah. And that's what he did for years.
You must have watched that. That must be the one I watched, Scott.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same exact thing.
And that's true. If Otani cared, yes, he makes $60 million at least in endorsements annually, which is pretty crazy. He wouldn't have deferred $680 million, whatever it was, to then go gamble it. But maybe he would. Maybe he has a pastime like everybody else. And it's a lot of hypocrisy when it comes to sports betting. And now we're freaking out about sports betting when every single major publication and podcast is literally driven by not Fangraphs. What's the word I'm looking for? DraftKings.
Yeah, Scott, to your point, scrolling across the screen under Otani today were odds of tonight's games. And I do want to say that Phil had mentioned this, and it is a huge point. We need to know how he got access to those accounts if he did, which, as you guys have outlined, it is believable and happens a lot with these young athletes, and even not so young. So how he got access to those accounts and how those wire transfers occurred. Was there voice confirmation, they thought, from Otani? Was it directly from his account? So I feel like there's a lot of questions, which would have been nice if they could have asked him today to follow up a little bit. But I'm guessing with the legalities, there's probably certain things they can't answer. But I feel like once those get exposed, now based on what he said today, it's a very black and white issue. He's saying one thing and Ippe saying another thing. And so we'll find out which one is true.
We saw Trevor Bauer, like it or not, basically vindicated, at least in the one case that really went deep. And they basically proved that this woman was trying to like take advantage of and extort money out of him. And everybody kind of jumped against him early. You understand why, based on the nature of the accusations. And also Trevor Bauer is not exactly like the most likable guy on earth. It's a little more surprising to me that so many people are jumping all over Ohtani. Like, it's like who couldn't like this guy, to kind of give him the benefit of the doubt. And that's why it's been a little more, I guess it's just been a little more shocking to me in that regard.
Yeah. You've got the face of baseball, and sure, let's take cards out of it. There's a lot of fans of teams like the Yankees, Giants, Angels, Mariners, Blue Jays that thought they had a chance at getting him that didn't. Yeah. So you've got people presumably from some of those teams, a little salty, that don't really know the truth about the situation, just like we don't know the truth, that are saying things like, awesome, I hope he gets banned permanently from the game. And it's like, wait a second. Like you guys said earlier, like this isn't a Pete Rose situation, anything close to it. Like at its worst, it's probably still not a Pete Rose situation. So second of all, do you really think the game of baseball would be better without Ohtani?
No, that's my beef with it.
It's like, not a game that's exactly thriving right now. Like, yeah, sure. Like, get rid of the pitching clocks, get rid of Ohtani, just kill the sport because your team sucks. Like, I'm from a shitty team, and I'm biased because
I'm a Rockies fan. Phil, at least your team has a championship. At least your team's won a division. Come on,
right.
Keep going.
and I am a little biased because probably myself, Jeff, Chris, who's not here, we probably have the highest Ohtani exposure if you count wax. So yes, we do have a lot to lose, but I'm still understanding of the fact that he could still have done something bad. He could still be suspended for something he's guilty or negligent about. And I don't know, this could end up hurting his reputation for the short term, but I don't see this being a major thing for the long term for him. It would suck to miss a year or part of a season, but at least he's not also pitching this year. But again, I think a lot of people are just kind of praying for the worst. And it's not anything specific to do with like racism or anything to do with Ohtani specifically. I think it's just people that like to hate on whoever's up at the top. And I think Ty probably knows a little bit about this from a different example. But I mean, Ohtani, what can you say that's negative about the guy up till this, right? Like, I don't know.
Here's some examples, Phil. Like these are posted on Twitter everywhere, right? Shohei, I did not have parlay relations with that bookie, which is kind of funny, really. But at the end of the day, like it's just spreading hate. Sorry, I bet on baseball they put Shohei Ohtani in there, and like even Pete Rose is now saying this crap. Pete Rose is not like I think Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame personally, but I wish I'd have had an interpreter. I'd be scot free. I don't think Pete Rose realizes that he bet. I believe he bet against his team. He bet for his team. He bet on his team while he was manager. Like,
yes,
it's tough. It's tough. But let's just say, hypothetically, I think we all agree. We think he's innocent, and we'll find out. But we could all be wrong. Let's say we are all wrong. And we're not going to say whether we believe that. Let's say it comes out that he was using Ippe as a betting person, right? Shield. Thank you, or fall guy, whatever you want to call it. And it comes out he also lied. He lies to the feds and he lies to Major League Baseball. And Ohtani is either suspended for 1 year or for 2 years, right? Like, and what happens to his cards then? Is that like doomsday for his cards, or do you think his overall play in the past, as well as play in when he comes back a year or two from now, could supplement and get over that fact, that big scandal?
I don't know, man. I don't know. The other thing we have to understand to not have answered this question directly, but I think worst case scenario, Scott, he gets suspended in like around June 1st for the rest of the season. I was talking to a friend, like that's when all the news, the full truth comes out. And that would be Manfred's discretion based on misconduct. And that would still not be betting on baseball per se, but it could be some of this other stuff. That's my thinking of like worst case scenario for him, that personally. What we also have to understand is that Ohtani is a little bit perhaps protected. There's a little bit of a perception there, perhaps, that they don't want anything to go wrong. Now, the way the first few days have rolled out, it's a little bit different than the Wander situation, but a lot of that is because the organization probably sniffed right away and realized there's something rotten here. And with Otani, a lot of people on Twitter think that they smell something rotten, but I don't think the four of us here really do. And I think that's part of the reason why the team is being so cooperative, I think. But we have to understand that we might not ever know the full truth. Like, we might think we get the truth, but some of this stuff could be swept.
The fact that the feds are involved, though, makes me feel less that way. I think if there's some wrongdoing on his part, it will be known from the federal government. They do not care he's Shohei Ohtani.
It'll be harder to cover up for sure,
Yeah.
because and they're not even necessarily from the investigation going after the clients, right? They're really going after the bookie, and the client's names just came up in this process. But I feel like other things will come out in that investigation that will give us some more insight. One thing I wanted to mention was I've seen a couple reports everything's off the record, of course, but talking to players that have both played with him and against him, and to a person, they were all shocked by it. And now, I mean, maybe Ohtani's really good at hiding it, which I know addicts can be very good at hiding things, but he seems so focused on baseball. He's always out there, especially last year when he was doing two things, pitching and hitting. I don't know. It would be hard for me to believe that no one who's with him day in, day out would have an idea about that. And versus Ippe, somebody who's a little more under the radar, I believe that people wouldn't know that he's involved in something.
Absolutely. If we talk like even in this group of individuals, Phil here and Ty here, actually everybody but me, maybe Chris. I don't know what Chris's viewing habits of sports are. I do not really care about outcomes of NFL games or NBA games anymore. My favorite team's the Jazz because I grew up in Idaho, and they haven't had much career team success. But my point is, that I'm probably not paying attention to these games every week, and I don't talk about it. But Phil does. He talks about Patrick Mahomes. He has some of his cards. Ty does. He's a Tigers fan. And if someone cares emotionally about specific events, and for these teams to be around, the Angels to be around Otani for 6-7 years, how long it's been, and they all say, yeah, this guy doesn't give a crap about sports. I kind of believe that more than people on Twitter who don't know him.
There would be somebody looking over their shoulder on the bus, looking over his shoulder on the bus with him having like the DraftKings app open in states where it's legal. There would be some players that would be, they might not rat on him, but they would know. And I feel like when enough people know about that, everybody knows about it.
Yeah, I agree. And I bet if Otani wanted to gamble, he could just pay someone a very small fee in Las Vegas to do it for him, and it'd be fine. And that's totally legal. And a number of people would love to be Otani's friend for free and place bets for Otani. I don't think that I personally don't feel like it's a risky situation, but obviously I could be wrong. And I'm not going to say I'm going to eat my words. I'm just giving somebody the benefit of the doubt. So I don't think I need to feel bad about that if I'm wrong. So,
yeah, I just want to mention, to get back to your question, and Phil talked a little bit about it. If there is some sort of suspension, how much of an impact would it have on his cards, and would it affect it long term? Well, baseball, I know there's a lot of fans who are purists that don't want anything and don't want to have anything to do with players who are involved in scandals, especially when they're against the written and unwritten rules of baseball. So that might affect his standing in the hobby.
I think it does too. Any missed time, if he misses a season, we turn our attention span so fast. I think it would be a huge blow for his cards personally.
But I'll be watching with interest to see if there are massive fire sales over the next several weeks of his cards, because based on today, I feel much more confident about having some of his cards than I did before.
Based on sports cards nonsense, they're talking about, well, I think Jesse had said that between 11 to 25% or 10 to 25% decreases for some of the cards already on auction. So this might be the time to buy them. But this isn't financial advice, and I'm not going to be buying any of his stuff, but I've already got exposure. I drafted him in fantasy over the weekend with a 25% discount, which I thought was good value at the time.
People also thought Wander was a good buy when this news came out for him. So very different situations. I know. I'm just saying
I don't know how many people thought Wander it was a good buy. In fact, I had just bought that card on PSA on eBay, his PSA 10 SSP, and the news came out before we even got it, and already by the time we got it was
sucks, dude.
But one non-gambling related point is after the press conference today, Ohtani was out on the field with his teammates and was actually throwing, and this is the first time he's thrown in public, which is pretty fast, right? All things considered, for him to be out there playing catch. So
surgery was end of October, early November.
Yeah,
that's really quick. But the Dodgers are already saying that he might play the outfield this season, so that's going to be very intriguing. I wouldn't do it, but they've already said they want to put him in the outfield potentially at the end of the year.
Crazy. He's warming up that arm playing slot machines.
We thought he tore his UCL pitching, but it was from gambling. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's like David Price playing Fortnite.
Okay, so speaking of pitchers, obviously Ohtani, the reason why Ohtani is Ohtani and his cards are so expensive is due to the fact that he can hit and pitch at a very elite level. Well, it feels like in recent hobby history and baseball history, the pitcher has completely changed from who they used to be. It is hard to see a pitcher ever really getting to 200 wins again. That's debuting past 2015, let alone, getting up to 300 wins or even breaking 3,000 strikeouts. They don't have the innings pitched. They don't have the health. They have such a focus on velocity and spin rate that there's more injuries. And that's what we're seeing this year. We saw Yuri Perez go down with injury. Brendan Woodruff's out for the year. Shane McClanahan is out for the year. Tommy John. Sandy Alcantara is recovering from Tommy John. Devin Williams has his back broken from lower vertebrae, plus other pitchers. Garrett Cole was just diagnosed with issues, and who knows what's going on with him. All these pitchers that people invest in have blown up in their face the last year or two. Last 5 or 6, 7, 8 years. There hasn't been a pitcher since maybe, Garrett Cole in 2013 who's had an MVP, Hall of Fame type career up to this point. So my question for you all is pitchers just dead in the hobby? I know they still are valuable for baseball, right? But is collecting pitchers just not a thing anymore at this point? Or are we going to be able to say, okay, it's best of their generation and go from there? What are your thoughts? I'll go with you first, Ty.
Yeah, it feels like it's dead to me. I'll be honest. I mean, even when people were talking about, Strider over the last year, I just kind of cringed a little bit. It feels like there's so much risk. And I'll say that and knock on wood, hoping to see a just totally dominant season from him at least. But yeah, I mean, we're not seeing guys pitch for any kind of longevity or any duration in a game, 5 innings, 6 innings, and then they're pulled. George Kirby was complaining last year about
that was weird.
6 innings. It's there's just different strategies, different analytics, different money ball, all kinds of things at play. And then they're worried about these guys getting injured. People speculate that actually the shortened innings and reduced amount of innings maybe is what's causing injuries. Who knows? But there's, increased velocity, increased arm torque, all these issues. And then they just keep getting injured. It seems like we've talked about it a lot in our, in this group. And it seems like all the criteria for Hall of Fame is going to have to adjust. We might not see guys hit these milestones for, 3,000 strikeouts just looking at the list of pitchers who are out there today, it's really hard to get excited about pitchers. And as somebody who, I like pitching. That's my favorite aspect of baseball. I fell in love with baseball when I learned about the mechanics of pitching and the different types of pitches and all the strategy around it. And now it's like you start to get really interested in somebody and then they're injured.
Every single time.
Tyler Glasnow, Chris Sale, all these guys they get hurt and then they come back and they're usually not the same. Maybe they are, maybe they're not, but they miss time. So yeah, overall, it doesn't feel like a great proposition to me. And I wish it were different, honestly.
Yeah, I feel the same way. Jeff, what do you feel like? I know your Brewers lab has had some good pitchers lately. What do you think?
Yeah, well, let's start there. We just lost Corbin Burns, who went to Baltimore. Excited he's got a new opportunity there with a young, fun team, and he's been great for us. Been the opening day starter the last several years, and his you know what his career WAR is?
19, I'm guessing.
13.6,
and he's 29.
Yeah.
29 years old.
So it definitely concerns me. There's only one active pitcher who has less than 10 years in the big leagues and is over 30 WAR. and that's a guy we talked about off air, and it's Aaron Nola.
Yeah.
He's the only guy that has over 30 WAR and less than 10 years in the league, and there's not many coming up behind him. So you're right, standards are going to have to change. But as far as collectability and investability, one thing that's frustrating is that I've been avoiding pitchers because of that. But this offseason, both Chris and I started looking closer at Garrett Cole and really thought him being on a Hall of Fame trajectory at his age, what he's accomplished so far, and the place where he pitches in New York, he's probably going to get a lot of big moments. And he seemed underpriced. So we finally went in and bought a couple of his cards this off season. And then, it was pretty devastating to hear about his potential issue. Now, whether he escapes surgery altogether or whether he just escapes it this year and they put it off until season's end, it's definitely something that's hanging over him. And I just don't know beyond him how you can convince yourself as a collector who enjoys seeing their cards hold some sort of value to want to buy pitchers.
Yeah. So speaking to Aaron Nola, he is such an interesting pitcher because his traditional numbers are not that good. They're not bad. He's a good pitcher, really good too, but nothing about him to this point really screams Hall of Fame besides maybe 1 or 2 years. He has a career 3.72 ERA with 90 wins and 71 losses through his age 30 season. And this is like the guy that people are kind of getting excited about. And it's just like, it's tough. It is brutal. And I know Chris in particular hates closers. And my father hates Jacob deGrom because how can you have 8 wins above replacement with 9 wins on the year and all these things? But we're going to have to come with the reality that this is going to be how pitchers are evaluated, whether we like it or not moving forward. So, Phil, what do you think?
I was looking at Nolan Ryan's career stats, the opposite of what we're talking about here, even though you could argue that he wasn't a phenomenal pitcher, although that's going to lead to some people in the comments not liking that comment. But he had 292 career losses. And I mean, yes, he gave up his fair share of runs, but a lot of that's because he went deep into games.
That's what I was going to say.
Deeper into games, you're more likely to get the decision, whether it's the winning side or the losing side. I think he had like 150 complete game losses or something because he was going deep into games. And if your team doesn't score more than a run or two, you might be on the wrong side of that. So if you look at the pitchers that have 2 Tommy Johns already, and a lot of these guys aren't 30 yet. Jacob deGrom, he's 30, of course, but Shane McClanahan's not. Walker Buehler's 29. He's had 2 Tommy Johns. Justin May has had 2 Tommy Johns. What's he like 26?
Hasn't he? Yeah.
Chris Paddock, 2 Tommy Johns. Drew Rasmussen has had 3 major elbow procedures. The last one was the internal brace. He's super young. So some combination of guys throwing harder, guys throwing close to their max, high stress innings, these players starting earlier with breaking stuff, the stuff that's the most strenuous in your elbow. And there's studies against this and for it, but the splitters, the sliders, and then the year-round baseball, that being something that kids are doing much earlier, especially in the southern states. Probably wouldn't be doing that up here, but none of the good baseball players are coming from up here. So, yeah, I mean, it kind of reminds me of basketball a little bit, Teapot. Like, enough guys getting burnt on pitchers over and over and over. Why would you still do it yourself? Clearly, you probably miss or underestimated the risk associated with this investment, and maybe it wasn't a good play. Hindsight's 2020, but it doesn't seem normal. And right now we've got a number of pitchers injured that I didn't mention. We've got some all-time greats right now that are injured. Justin Verlander's a little banged up. Clayton Kershaw is going to miss at least 2 to 4 months, it looks like, at this point. Max Scherzer, he's just not effective anymore, so that doesn't really count. He's really old. Yeah, DeGrom,
Basically,
exactly.
All the active leaders. The only top 5 active pitcher who's currently pitching is Chris Sale.
Yeah. So that they're not part of the issue because those guys buck the trend. They're outliers already because of the wars and the stats they put up. We're mostly talking about the guys that are between like 30 and 32 years old, I guess, or 20 and 32 years old. What I would say now is the most attractive pitcher that's healthy, not including Spencer Strider, that's under the age of 30. Paul Skeens might be on that short list, but a lot of people are calling him the best pitching prospect since Steven Strasburg. And hopefully he doesn't become Steven Strasburg because his prices will be cheaper than they are now.
Who had a great career. Fantastic, but not good enough. One thing that sucks about pitchers too is even when they're good, they aren't worth very much, right? That's the issue. Like even we're looking at Garrett Cole, but you can go on auction and get a Justin Verlander Bowman Chrome Gold Auto at BGS 9.5 for $3,000. That's the same cost as Corbin Carroll right now, right? If you have a hitter who has that type of career, it's going to be 10 to 20 grand, maybe more, like, right? But for a pitcher, unless you're Kershaw, who's literally been an all-time great in the regular season at least, you do not have value even when you're good. And so there's no reason to buy them because you probably have a 99.9% failure rate because there's more pitchers than hitters who debut every year. And on top of that, they aren't worth anything if they are good. Yeah. So it's like a pretty obvious, like maybe you shouldn't buy those. So,
a year ago, there was Fox Sports put out an article about the top pitchers 25 and under. And they do this stuff, sites do this all the time.
Yeah.
Number 2, they had Strider. You guys want to guess who they had at number 1 a year ago?
I saw it. I don't want to say who it was.
McClanahan?
No, they had McClanahan at 3.
Jeff, do you want to guess? I think
I would have guessed McClanahan, so I don't.
You want me to guess, Ty?
Yeah.
Yuri Perez?
Alek Manoah.
Alek Manoah was number 1. And if that doesn't just say it all, honestly, like even when it's not an injury, it's a pitch clock change implementation. Like they had Julio Urias at 4. So, there's just, we've seen like every possible thing happen to many of the guys on this list, from injury to can't use a pitch clock to domestic abuse to you're like,
gambling.
Geez, come on. There is one name too it's just still very, very early, but I think he's got the velocity and the stuff if he can stay healthy. And maybe you guys agree with this, maybe you won't, but Grayson Rodriguez, really good later in the season last year. I think he's had a few good spring training outings, and he's still really young. He's 24 years old. So, I mean, really young for a pitcher. So I don't know, maybe he can string together a series of, 4 or 5 good seasons in a row and give us something to talk about 4 years from now.
So Ty, I like that. Let's go over a pitcher we all believe in besides one of the already Hall of Famers, not named Garrett Cole. Basically anybody who's debuted past 2015. Let's see if we all can name one. I'm going to go first because I want to take one that I believe in, because after that, I really don't know. But even though Yuri Perez is hurt, he's 20 years old last year, 21 this year. He's someone that you could take a risk on, has no Bowman Chrome autograph, hardly any rookies. All of that is like something I'm into and I love. But he's hurt. Who knows what's wrong with him? So that's who I would do. Phil, who are you taking to end this episode? You two.
Yeah, the guy I take is probably Bobby Miller. I know he's a little bit older, probably 25-ish, maybe turning 26 soon, but throws the ball 100. Probably will get hurt soon. He's got multiple plus pitches, and he's a guy where I think we'll see a little bit of stabilization or normalization in his strikeout rate. He was better than what he showed last year with his K rate. So I think it's maybe a different usage mix that'll take that to the next level.
Awesome.
He's actually 24 years old and 355 days. So he'll be 25 in April.
Nice. And then Jeff, who are you taking?
All right. I'm gonna take 2 pitchers that we've already mentioned. Teapot mentioned Grayson, which back when I got into the hobby and was into prospecting, he was in Bowman draft. So I have a lot of his early cards. So I'm hoping that Teapot's right. But I'm still behind Burns a little bit in his less than 14 career WAR, because he was sort of a late bloomer. He's really shown the last couple of years he's been able to adapt. And so I feel like he's in an exciting situation with a young, fun team that maybe could make some noise. And if he could put together 5 or 6 more years of, let's say, 4 WAR, then maybe he could get himself into the conversation. But I wouldn't buy anybody, but he would be a guy I would still, at least he's shown that he can do it.
Yeah. Awesome. I think that's a really great place to wrap this up. It's been a pretty long episode about pitchers. One last pitcher you should check out is German Marquez for the Rockies, coming off of Tommy John. One of the best, if not the best, Rockies pitcher of all time. Whoa. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. We appreciate it. We'll see you in the next episode.
Yeah.